I'm Dr. Yvonne Cason, the president of, I am the president of Spiritual Awakenings International, but I'm also the group leader of Toronto Awakening Sharing Group. So, welcome to our Toronto Awakening Sharing Group event. We love to know where everyone's joining us from. So, please take a moment now and just type into the chat where you're joining us from today. Um, I'm joining you from Toronto, Canada. And we've got Jeffrey from Ontario, Mountain View, California, Vancouver, BC. Wow, that's awesome. People joining us from all over. And Robert's from Oregon, Joe's from Nova Scotia, Clara's from Seguin, Texas. Welcome, everybody. Wonderful to see you here. So it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Brian Sackett. Now, after his presentation, we will be having a question and answer period. So if you have any questions for Brian at any time, just put them in the chat, and Brian will be happy to answer them at the end. So Dr. Brian Sackett, PhD, is a semi-retired clinical psychologist. He was previously in private practice in San Jose, California for many years, but he is currently living in Toronto, Canada. Brian has a PhD in transpersonal psychology from the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology in California. As a psychologist, he specialized in working with clients dealing with trauma and abuse, spiritual emergence, anxiety, and couples communication issues. He currently leads the Toronto Meditation Self-Inquiry Group and does spiritual guidance and teaching. Brian is also a board member of Spiritual Awakenings International and co-chair of the Spiritual Awakenings International Experiencers Sharing Circles. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brian Sackett.
Thank you, Yvonne, for that kind introduction. And I really appreciate the invitation to be here and speak with you. And I appreciate all of you coming and showing up and taking your time. So, this is going to be a very personal presentation. And uh, what I'm talking about is a shared death experience with my wife of 25 years. And what it's told me about the afterlife and who we are now. Oh, there we go. One of the things I want to say is that there are many accounts of shared death experiences, and some of them are in this book, At Heaven's Door by William Peters. The story you're going to hear from me, a condensed version of that, is actually in this book. But there are a number of stories of people's encounters, and they all present a slightly different picture of the afterlife. So, um, another really good book about this is Raymond Moody's one, Investigating Shared Death Experiences. So, uh, I'm just sharing my experiences of this and what I've learned from it, and hopefully that will be a benefit to you. So this is Kris, Kristi Tollefson Sackett, and I'm going to share some pictures of our life growing up together, our children, partly to just give you a context that we are an ordinary family. Um, and Kris was an extraordinary being, an extraordinary person, is still. And that's one of the things we'll talk about. This is Kris and me fairly soon after we had met, and eventually we made it to our wedding. Um, and this is me in Maui. Uh, when we could afford it, which wasn't every year, we really loved going to Maui, and there's a number of pictures here from that. This was taken in 1989, and this is Kris and me and our daughter Kate. And I could spend the whole presentation just showing this picture. You know, it was such a joy to be with. And you can tell that there was a lot of love and a lot of humor and communication between the two of us. The same is true for my son Logan. I just don't have photographic evidence of it. Um, so, uh, Kate was fascinating. We spent a lot of time with her. She brought a lot of love into our lives, and I'm going to return to this slide a little later in the presentation. This is Kate and Logan. This was taken in 1991, and that's my mom, Grandma Louise. Um, and so we just had a good time together. And these are pictures through the years, as you can tell. A number of them are in Hawaii and Maui. Um, and we had a good time together as a family. This is in Mission Beach. Uh, Kris, when I first met her, lived in an apartment, and it was a block from Mission Beach in San Diego on one side, and a block from the Pacific Ocean on the other side. So she literally lived in paradise, and I was humbled that she would move to the Bay Area to be with me. Um, but we all had a good time. Uh, this is taken down in Brazil, and I'll go into why we were down there in a little bit. Kris was a musician. Her undergraduate degree was in voice and piano. And we would sing sometimes together. Um, she had a voice kind of like Julie Andrews. It was so clear and warm and full of emotion and caring. And one of the tragic things that happened is when the first surgery, she had damaged a vocal cord, and so she lost her range and strength in the voice. Um, Another picture of Maui over the years. This is Kris in her last Thanksgiving. This is November of 2011, so 13 years ago now. And I put this picture in at this point because this shows Kate is 4 years old, Logan is 2 years old in this picture. And if you look at Kris's neck, you see that there's surgical tape over, a pretty large incision. Um, we had a friend named Natasha Wist that came into the living room where Kate was after her surgery and saw her like this. And she said, "Oh my God, Kris, they've slit your throat." And um, it, that affected me. The surgeries on Kris's body somehow, it was hard to see her being put into like this. But um, she was really strong and kind of a trooper about it. So we lived with this for 19 years. Um, she was diagnosed in 1993 and she had this surgery. They did a radioactive iodine treatment to knock out whatever was remaining of her thyroid. And after that, uh, there was supposed to be no more thyroid tissue in her body. Now, they track thyroid cancer by several things. One of them is a molecule called thyroglobulin in the bloodstream. And Kris's thyroglobulin level was very, very low, but very incrementally it was coming up. The other way they track it is radioactive iodine scans. And for 8 years or so, we assumed that Kris was fine and that the treatment had worked because uh, nothing was showing up on these radioactive iodine scans. But unfortunately, it turns out that her cancer, her thyroid tumor cells did not uptake iodine. And so that's the main way they treat it. When they uptake the iodine, the tumors uptake the iodine, it concentrates the radioactivity and that kills off the cancer cells. So usually it's quite treatable and not fatal. But hers didn't. And one of the things I learned through this whole thing is that you really have to be careful about the assumptions that very well meaning and well intentioned medical doctors are making that turn out to not be correct. And there's a whole long story I won't go into about how we discovered that. But um, so basically, we lived with this for many years. Every 6 months, she would have radioactive iodine scan and then a blood test and maybe sometimes some ultrasounds or CT scans. And we would go through a period of anxiety right before the tests. And then sometimes we would have a lot of relief. Other times it would show there's cancer cells growing. And so she would have to have surgery, mostly in her neck, to remove, like walnut-sized tumors that would grow. She had one surgery on her lung because when they did this original surgery that you see here, there were 10 lymph nodes in her neck that this had spread into. So it turns out that it had spread into her lymph system and her bloodstream, and that's how it got into the lungs. Um, they, so they did one lung surgery. Um, after, so we looked at this like, okay, this is a condition like diabetes. We can treat it, we can deal with it when it comes up, but it's not something that we kind of have to live, in great fear of. But the last summer, which was 2012, she started having symptoms. Before then, her energy level was a little less, but there weren't a lot of symptoms, and we considered that we lived a really normal life. But that summer, it started, having symptoms, and the main one of those was water in her lungs, actually in the pleural lining, and we didn't know what was going on. We had been working with a wonderful doctor named Orlo Clark at University of California, San Francisco, who was a world-renowned expert in thyroid cancer. But he retired about 2 years before this started happening, and we looked for ways to understand what was going on. Eventually, we went back to the lung surgeon who had done that original lung surgery, and they did CT scan, and it showed that there was uh, increased involvement with her liver and starting to go into her heart. And we arranged a bunch of appointments. We were hoping to deal with this, and then kind of her stamina just went down to the point where we had to go up to the hospital. We went up to the University of California, San Francisco hospital in San Francisco, and they did some CT scans and a bunch of other tests. They admitted her to the ICU, um, and the day after she had been admitted, they came to us and they said, "Look, you better get your family here. We think that what has happened is that this has turned into an anaplastic form of cancer. It mutated. Anaplastic means there's no cell boundaries, to the cancer, and it's virulent and it spreads really, really fast." And they had done a CT scan 3 weeks ago at that lung surgeon's request. And between that CT scan and the one that we had at the ICU, her entire right lung was filled with tumors to the point where her lung wasn't going up and down. So they said, "Get your family here." By this time, Kris couldn't talk any longer. So after 19 years of, kind of worrying, but, living with this, it was so sudden, it was almost like she was hit by a truck. um, and so she ended up, this is her in the hospital. We did get my kids there. This is Kate. She's 23 at the time. Logan is 21, and we managed to get her family from North Dakota um, and from Southern California to come. And one of the things that was a great gift was the one of the ICU nurses suggested I lie in bed with Kris. And so for the last 3 hours of her life, I was lying in bed with her here. And previously, she had been agitated because with her lung not going up and down, she felt like she was suffocating, even though she had oxygen going into her. And she got so agitated that at one point, so she tore out an arterial IV. And so I took to holding her hands when she would get agitated, and she was still strong. She pulled so hard on my left shoulder that 2 months later I had to have rotator cuff surgery. You know, but when she was here in this last couple of hours of her life, peace came in. It was she was completely, totally at peace. So the shared death part of this experience is I was sad and concerned. I know we when she was still upright and we were looking at one another, we looked at each other after they said you're going to die in a few days to a week. We didn't know how to go through that. And you know, it was overwhelming, but it was also okay. And it was really okay when I was lying in bed with her. I felt this great sense of uplift and love and joy, even dreaming through Kris into me. I was lying with my right side to her. I could feel it just coming in. Um, when I was worried, like Kate and Logan were standing around the bed as she was passing, and so was a boyfriend of Kate's, and then Fritz's sister. And so there were a few people in the room. Most of her family had been there all day, and this was late in the, you know, like after midnight that day, and they had gone back to the hotel room. Um, I asked my kids if they had felt this love and joy and uplift that I was feeling, and they said no. But Kate said that having Chris's family standing around was really comforting. She sort of felt like she could get through this. But when I worried about are they okay, it cut off this stream of love and joy and uplift. So I learned, my thoughts kept going, but I learned just to pay attention to her. And as I was doing that, I could feel that this was Kris. There's a sense of identity. Uh, and yet it was a Kris that was a much larger being than I had ever seen before, much larger energy wise, but there was many, many more dimensions to her. And it's kind of like if you have the mind of a two-dimensional flat, figure, and you're trying to understand the 3D world that's going through time and space, it's really difficult to do because you don't have both points of reference. I couldn't grasp in my mind who and what Kris was at this point. I just could feel it. Um, Another thing that happened while this was going on was um, we loved each other a lot, and yet we were married for 25 years, so we had our inevitable, ways we hurt each other or disappointed each other or conflicting needs and all that. And another thing I cannot explain in words is what happened then. These differences or conflicts or whatever you want to call them, they didn't just dissolve, they resolved. They were completed. They came to completion. And again, I have no idea how that happened, but every last one just was resolved. And one of the ways I knew this was that they came in this clear, strong sense that she would always be there with me and always love me. And I would always be with her spirit and always love her. Um, so as I was lying next to her, I felt her body. Her heart wasn't beating very strongly. And what was happening was her body started cooling down. And where I could feel her, it started feeling a little bit like uh, uh, wet concrete that was slowly hardening. There was a sense of lumpiness to this. I could tell that my body warmth was being perceived by Kris and that that was comforting to her. But over time, her breathing uh, slowed. And I didn't time it, but uh, it seemed to take, you know, 5, 6, 7 minutes or longer between each breath. And it got to the point where I was thinking, oh, this is the last one. But then there'd be another little breath, and it just went along on for a very long time. But eventually, she did pass away. She stopped breathing completely. And the medical staff came in and pronounced the tomb of death. Um, they were talking to me about could they do an autopsy and confirm that what they thought had happened, that it went anaplastic through an autopsy, and I agreed to that. And they did come back about a month later and say that yes, that's what indeed had happened. Um, I mentioned Dr. Clark. I talked to one of his main nurses after Kris passed away, and she told me she had dealt with like 25,000 thyroid cancer patients over her career with Dr. Clark, and Kris was the only one where this happened, where this thing went anaplastic. Um, so she was a rare being, a rare case. When my kids had driven separately, so I was driving home from the hospital after this, and uh, San Francisco is a hilly city, and I came up over a hill, and there was this incredible full, yellow orange moon. It was actually a blue moon. It was the second full moon in August of 2012. And it was piercingly beautiful. Um, when I some days later, after they had done the autopsy and released Kris's body, we had her cremated. So this is her in the cardboard box that is going into the crematorium. What and Kris wanted for ashes to be actually buried, which was a little surprising to me. I want mine scattered. But uh, this was actually one of the hardest parts of this whole experience. They dug a hole in this little cemetery plot. Um, her tombstone in this grave is in the Alta Mesa Cemetery in Palo Alto, California. They dug this hole, and in the burial, they gave me the urn, and I had to kneel down and place this down into the hole. And there was something about that that just broke me. It was so final. It was like, oh, and I had had this incredible uplifting love experience that actually went on for about 2 months after she passed away. But it was also as if a forest fire had come through and burned down my life. There was just nothing there. And I had loved listening to music or reading books. I didn't listen to any music for a couple of months. I didn't watch TV. I didn't read any books. I just went to work and I came home and I did all the things. There's lots of bureaucratic things you have to do when someone passes away. I did those things, but I just sat. And a couple things helped me kind of come back to life. One of them was for a couple months, I did a loss of spouse grief support group. Uh, but I think the thing that really helped me kind of kickstart back in, I had taken a very extensive trauma treatment training called sensory motor therapy. It met 3 days, a 3 day weekend once a month for 9 months. And after you had taken the course, some of us were invited to come facilitate and help the teachers teach the new course for new people. And so I did that, and somehow the engagement with people did help me. Um, this is the other thing being that helped me. This is Riley. Riley was a 10-pound half Cocker Spaniel, half toy poodle. He lived with our family. He lived a total of 16 years. 8 years was with just me. Uh, he would lie between my legs, and he was so warm and loving. He really kind of helped me get through this. So let's go into the what did I learn from this? And some of what I learned was from some after death communications that I had. Now, one of the things I had fun with doing this presentation is I used artificial intelligence to try to create some images for this presentation. And some of them, like this one, I really like. Um, they came through and they conveyed. So this was an attempt to convey an nighttime visitation. I call it that. It's different than a dream. You know, in dreams, they morph, they change scenes rather abruptly. They're not linear. If you don't write your dream down right away when you wake up, it fades just like that. These nighttime visitations were very much like sitting, like when Kris came to me, it was like sitting right in front of her, seeing her clearly. It was linear. You know, we had these long conversations or short conversations sometimes, and I still remember them all vividly to this day. The first one of these was about 2 months after she passed away. And Kris, as I said, she was a marriage and family therapist and worked with emotionally disturbed adolescents, mostly in the Santa Clara County school system in California. She came to me and she says, Brian, you and I need to go to therapy together. And I said, well, how come, Kris? And she said, you need to have your head examined. You think I died. That was it. That was the whole communication. Um, there were some other ones I'll talk about in a few minutes because she helped me in a number of different ways. But uh, about 9 months after after Kris had passed, Logan and Kate and I went back to Maui. It wasn't our usual, joyous vacation because we missed Kris. But while I was there, I decided I would really make some clear attempts to communicate more with Kris. And so I did that by doing automatic writing, where I would write down a question and I would wait and hear her answer. And one of the ways I knew that this was working is that she was telling me things that you know were contradicting my picture of what life was like on the other side, for instance. So she was telling me surprising things. So I'm going to read some of these for you because they do give some really good clues about what the afterlife is like. So I said the first time, "Hi, Kris. We're here at the Hale Pauhana in Maui. That was a place in Kihei, which was south of Lahaina, the place that burned down tragically a year and a half ago. Um, I wish you were here with Kate, Logan, and me. I know you'd enjoy it as much as I do. I ask that you bring us turtles and dolphins. And yesterday we saw four turtles. One had a softball sized shell under its left flipper, grabbed on for the ride. There was also a young turtle that was maybe 18 inches in diameter. The other turtles were larger. The first day snorkeling, we saw three turtles, all right here at Halipauhana, more than we've seen in any other trip. So I'm guessing you're here doing that. I would like to hear from you what your life is like now. Are you willing to communicate? And I got a yes from my inner guides that she was. And then she came through. She said, "It is difficult to talk with you directly. I'm not sure, but let's try. There is inner support for this project. It's actually quite strong. I am working with the Devas here in Maui to send the turtles, and we'll try for dolphins as well. One of the difficulties is to communicate the emotions. I know you care so much about that, and we struggled for ways to do that when we were alive together. I can try to tell you about here, but it's true that there are more dimensions involved than we dealt with in our physical forms. And without those points of reference, the multiple dimensions, it plain doesn't make sense. The things in common, or the threads underlying all, are love and caring and purpose. It's also true that learning is a continual theme. Imagine that everything, and I do mean everything, that you think is manifested in some form, some creation that can take on a life of its own. So if you're angry at the car cutting in front of you and then going slowly, and imagine the rubber melting off the tires, if you're here, that would happen with possibly disastrous consequences. Of course, we travel just by thinking about where we want to go. So there are no cars here. But the point is, the suffering there prompts one to learn to carry love and concern in thoughts and hearts. So that is what manifests here. There are indeed levels of like minded individuals here, although our service involves being willing to travel and work in levels less refined than your own may be. This is true all the way down to life on earth. Then I asked, do you still have a personal relationship with me and the kids? She said, not as you understand it. I love you and Kate and Logan unreservedly and completely, and send you my love and best wishes constantly. It isn't as self oriented as the love we shared in our physical bodies, partly because these larger dimensions make it more clear that we are all connected and that love is what connects us. So it's not as narrow in focus. That's why one of your questions, how can we love multiple people from our many past lives, doesn't really make sense here. The distinctions, the uniqueness of everyone that are so important there just aren't as important here, yet without losing the relevance and the meaning of life suffering there. I said, will we be together after I die? She said, we're together now and forever. You are part of me and I am part of you. After you die, you realize that ever so much more clearly. I said, have you been with Karen and your mom? Karen was Kris's 14-month younger sister who passed away a year before Kris did of vaginal cancer. And her mom died at her mom's age 46 of sarcoidosis, which is a fibrous tissue disease. Kris said, yes, but not as separate beings. Your picture of life continuing much as it is there, just with more ethereal bodies, isn't the way it is. There are many more resonances here, like multiple harmonies vibrating so completely. It's difficult to make distinctions between what is me and what is the rest of the beings. Communicating is wearing partly because it takes so much effort to separate out what you think of as Kristi. I think this is one of those places where my imagining wasn't matching at all what she was telling us. Um, and it's interesting. You'll see in the rest of the presentation how some of this stuff, which was like 9 months after she passed away, was really shown to be true later on. Um, So I'll do that. So this was a couple days later. I said, even though I have a sense of communicating, I still miss you so much. Logan said this afternoon that it's quieter without you. And it's true. I miss your music, your bubbling, infectious caring, and holding your hand. I don't really want to start a life without you, but there's no choice. Just as you had no choice when your body shut down. What does all this look like from there? Kris said, I am so sorry that you are being asked to burn through this to allow the smaller things in life to boil away. Because nothing diverting is going to withstand these emotions. You volunteered for a hard mission, a necessary one. You won't understand for some time what this is, but in the change times ahead, this suffering will help others who will need it so much and not have it unless you prevail through the sadness, despair, and the lack of joy. You really appreciate the qualities I gave to you and the kids and miss soaking in them. So they have to come from deep within you now, from the place of oneness. It's your caring that will bring them out. It seems too hard, but didn't we go through so much beyond what we thought we could do? I love you, dear one. Again, a few days later. Me. My plan is to write you every day and see if the sense of dialogue eases and becomes clear. Today, we snorkeled in the Ahiahi Marine Preserve that was closed the last time we were here. Kate spotted an octopus and Logan saw it change colors. I saw dolphins outside the condo as you promised. Also, another large turtle swimming by. It's a peaceful day. How are you? Kris said, it would be good if you let go control of your hand and then I can write. She's referencing some lizards that we had seen with orange bellows in their throat, and she said those are really colorful. It works like that here. It's not thought; things just happen. I said, I don't want to live alone, but I can't get my mind around living without you and think of you all the time. So wonder how can that be? How is this going to work from your side? Yes. As I said before, there aren't the distinctions here there are there. There will be no separation between you, me, and whoever else you love. Relax and stop trying to ease your anxiety about how it will work out. Trust yourself in spirit and let unfold God's will. Keep saying the prayers and allowing it all to be. Okay, I'll read you just one more. This I wrote 3 weeks later after we'd come back to Saratoga, California, which is near San Jose. That's where we lived for 30 years. Uh, Kris, I felt, now this is me, Kris, I felt you powerfully in Errol's session. Errol is a psychologist that I was working with. Um, Thinking of you on the beach at Haleakala in your white cotton t-shirt dress with the blue flowers, I feel your energy. Are you there in a form I can relate with? Are your concerns still including enough of the human to make sense to me? Kris said, I can love you more fully, more than I was able to manage while in my physical body, and perhaps more than you can manage in yours. I can relate enough to human concerns to communicate and to have a relationship with you. I am proud of your efforts to be in a clear relationship to yourself and others, and I know it's difficult. The energies are strong enough to pull your psyche apart if you're not focused and in touch with what you've been calling wise self. So she's referencing there that, sometimes like when the Kundalini energy comes through or you touch the transcendent, those energies feel infinite and really, really strong and are a little difficult. Kris showed up in a number of other ways. So this picture, I'm pretty sure what's behind Kate is a white veil that's being lit up by the sun. But what it looked like to me was Kris standing behind Kate. And these are all Kris's relatives, family that had come to Kate's wedding. So it seemed appropriate that she showed up there. So now I want to talk about the close friends encounters with Kris over a few years. This is my friend Paul, who was the best man at Kris and my wedding. I was the best man at his wedding. And Paul has the capacity at times to have very clear inner vision. So he's seen her a few times, and I want to describe that. So one of them was he attended our wedding, our Kate's wedding, 6 years ago, and he saw Kris standing there as this huge golden orb. And it's kind of like the picture of the sun on the back of Kate's shoulder there. Um, he had attended the memorial service we had for Kris in October of 2012 after she had passed, and he saw her there as just a golden sun. Uh, but about a year ago, he saw this. So um, I do facilitate every other Thursday night meditation and self inquiry group, and Paul is a member of that group over Zoom, and I've done that for over 6 years. Um, this was the one and only time the topic of the meditation group was getting in touch with loved ones, spirits who had passed away. Uh, Paul was not able to come to that because he was driving his wife, Susan, to the dentist. But while he was at the dentist, he was and waiting for her, he tuned into the group, and this is what he saw. He saw Kris, and I. This is my you know, chalk pastel drawing of what he described. He saw her as a golden shaped orb. And there were other beings, other uh, people who had passed away, whose spirits had joined in and merged with uh, Kris's. So this is another one I like from AI that describes this better, a little better. I think this is pretty close to what he saw, which is Kris's large golden orb or spirit. He heard the words choir master. And Kris was a choir teacher early on in her teaching career. She taught at Klamath Falls, she taught high school choir. Um, but he saw these other beings within, had just merged in with Kris's spirit. And then he started hearing these harmonies, these musical resonances, I guess that's literally the music of the spheres, one version of that. Um, but in her writing, she had talked about how people, are less distinct. I think this was a quite direct visual manifestation of what she was talking about. Another thing I wanted to say briefly is that Kris helped me to be at peace with having a new love. So this is another AI drawing I did. Um, and this was after I had started dating Dana, who's my wife now, and I was still having some trouble in terms of, okay, I love Kris. How can I be with loving somebody else? Uh, and so I had another nighttime visitation with Kris, and in this one, for the first time, I went to see her, and the she was in this house with many rooms. She was really glad to see me. I was glad to see her. I hugged her. I could feel her body, and we were talking away. And then all of a sudden, in walks this very tall, sort of brown blonde haired looking Norwegian guy. That even though I knew it was completely hypocritical at the time, when I saw him, I really didn't like this guy. So, and Kris said to me, Brian, I would like to introduce you to my new partner. Now, one of the things that this is that same slide, one of the things that I learned from Jungian psychology is that our psyches communicate with us often in the form of symbols. So I believe this was Kris's attempt to make me feel better. Um, I think this, picture is more like what life is like over there. I'm not even sure we have distinct one partner over there, but it was a way of her helping me to feel better. Um, and so this is Dana. This is a beach at Prince Edward Island. This is us at a shop in Tanzania. This is at the Toronto International Airport. There's a big airplane engine there, and we took a selfie. Um, this is us in Rishikesh, uh, and this is us on vacation in Mexico. Um, so I know that Kris not only helped me feel more at ease with loving someone new, but I think she literally on the other side helped arrange us meeting. Kris and I had gone down to this Brazilian healer named João de Deus, and she got some really good help from, you know, uh, like a couple things. One of them was the physical tumors in her neck. I had a very good uh, calibration of how fast they were growing because in a year and 9 months, she had a surgery that cleared them all out. A year and 9 months later, she had another surgery, and there was a golf ball sized tumor that had grown. So they were growing not, you know, horribly fast, but they were growing at a pretty good rate. And after that, her tumors grew at about 10% a year. So it slowed the rate of growth down quite a bit. There was also the first time we went to Brazil, we were really weighed down. We had thought she was clear and free, but then we found that there were tumors growing. She had a first big surgery of her neck and her lung, and uh, and it helped me with my terror of losing Kris. Um, I had been kind of ham-handedly, unconsciously pushing Kris to do some, you know, treatments like a macrobiotic diet or anything that would help, knock this cancer out. And so somehow down there was some spiritually transformative experiences where I saw that this was in God's hands, not mine. And that I really needed to just let go and turn it over to God. And when I did that, it really helped clean up and clarify Kris and my relationship. It helped us to be more at ease. So I'm really grateful for that. But um, after Kris passed away, like a year and 9 months after she passed away, I was grieving pretty hard. And I decided I would go back down to this healer in Brazil. At one point, the last time we had seen him was in Atlanta. And Kris went through the line, and Zhao said, I will see you in Abidjania, which is where the healing center was in Brazil. And uh, for whatever reason, Kris never went. She didn't want to be away from the kids that much. So I decided I was going to take her picture back down to Brazil and go through and show it to Zhao and basically make that be complete. And that's where I met Dana. So it was, I really appreciate all the inner help that I've gotten. I want to talk a little bit about what I've learned about how my continued grieving interferes with here and now communication with Kris. So, and this came clear. I was in a meditation retreat in October, and I recognized that I was helped to recognize that um, my sadness and my grieving were actually interfering with my ability to feel connected and actually commune with Kris. And um, there's nothing wrong with grieving and being sad, right? That's natural, and I'm not trying to uh, suggest that one should artificially, you know, shorten that or try to, just go through the natural process. But I think one of the unintended side effects of all this sadness and grieving is it does interfere with the ability to communicate clearly and commune. And in fact, there's this whole uh, approach to inducing after death communications that Alan Botkin developed. He was a psychologist in the VA hospital in Chicago area treating Vietnam War vets, and he noticed that uh, when he would use an EMDR protocol, which is a desensitization and reprocessing trauma treatment, um, to work on the distress. It's not getting rid of the sadness completely, but just the distress about the grieving and the sadness. When that was with EMDR brought down to zero, there would be these spontaneous after death communications. And I, I'm an EMDR certified therapist as well, and I've had that experience working with people that does happen. Okay, so let's get to who and what we are and what I learned from that. Now, this is my most frustrating dealing with artificial intelligence trying to create images. I tried a whole number of images to get this, dozens, and I would tell it, draw me something with seven chakras in these colors. And it would come back and say, okay, here's seven chakras with these colors. And there would be 14 spheres. And I would say, okay, no, take those away. And it would come back and here's the only seven spheres. And it would still be 11 spheres. And so it came up with a number of really, funny things. But uh, this is this is closer, but not exactly right. But basically, what I've learned from these experiences with Kris and with other spiritually transformative experiences I've gone through is that um, we are simultaneously big colored balls of energy. And those are our spirits, our souls, whatever you want to call that. And that is a unique individual manifestation of the divine creative force. Again, whatever you want to describe that as. I like the image of the Father, Mother, God, uh, and feeling the light of the Father, Mother, God within yourself. Um, and simultaneously and paradoxically, we are these people in bodies with personalities, and we do have different energy centers, and you can work with those, um, but that's essentially what we are. And you can tune in. One of the ways is just below your sternum. There seems to be a portal into your spiritual core that you can pay attention to the stillness, and the stillness that paradoxically is empty and full of everything. You can pay attention to the constant, and the constant is what radiates presence of who we are, this love and light and wisdom, this deeper wisdom that we are. And it's also what doesn't come and go. So remember when I was lying in the bed next to Kris and I would think and worry about my kids, it would cut off this transcendent experience I was feeling. If we let our thoughts and feelings and emotions and senses go and focus on what's not changing, what's not coming and going, then we feel this presence of our own beingness. Um, and that's important in these after death communications, because you can do that and you can go into the transcendent place where we're one with everyone and everything, and those beings, those spirits are right there, and you can commune with them. but this is what Kris taught me. When you look at this picture, Kris is just pure love. It's so obvious in her face, in her expression, in just what she's emanating. And that's who we all are. We are pure love. And that pure love radiates throughout nature. Um, and it's teaching me, helping me to look at my beliefs that are getting in the way of just letting myself be what I am, and what we all are, which is just pure, radiant love. When we allow that pure, radiant love in, it brings us into more attention and more focus and more aliveness in our day to day human life. And so that's the main message I want to leave you with. So I'm at the place where I'm happy to take questions now. And I really thank you for your attention and for listening.
Thank you, Brian. If anybody has any questions for Brian, please put them into the chat, and I'm sure he'll be happy to do his best to answer them. I have a question to get things going, please, Brian. Um, One of the things that really struck me about your really beautiful story is that how you and I've experienced this myself, and I've heard this from other people too, that even though you had a very, very beautiful and positive STE, this beautiful shared death experience when your wife Kristi passed over, that even though you had such a positive STE, you, in addition, had to go through the reality of a really difficult grief reaction. And I was wondering if you could just comment on that a little bit, because sometimes people think, oh, why are you feeling so sad when you had such a positive experience? But it was like you were going through both at the same time, it seems. Could you describe that a little bit for us?
I think that has very much to do with um, our nature is paradoxical. Our We have these limited parts of ourselves that are the parts of me that felt like a forest fire had gone through and burned my life down, burned it away. I was very much aware of that. I was caught in it, and when I stayed caught in it, then that's kind of the rabbit hole I went down. I really felt that. And yet, if you pay attention to the eternal you that's always been here and always will be here, that you find by turning away from the thoughts and emotions and feelings and focusing on this deeper transcendent self, it's perfectly okay. It's wonderful. It's joy. It's bliss. It's uplifting. And so both of those are simultaneously true. That's what's paradoxical, right? I, you know, um, this was the hardest thing I've ever gone through is losing Kris. It was devastating on a lot of levels, and even with the amount of spiritual support I was having from her spirit and from my own spirit, um, I think one of the lessons of all this is that when you just let yourself be the love that we are, then we're held and supported through whatever we're facing here in the human level. And in my way of looking at the world, the divine created this to have value both on the transcendent level and on the human level that includes human suffering. And I don't want to do a spiritual bypass and jump over this. Uh, yeah, so that's the best I can answer that, I think. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Brian. We have a couple questions from Marina. I'll ask you them one at a time. First off, she'd like to know, are you still doing channeled writing with Kris?
I don't do that regularly, Marina. I, um, I feel like I commune with her just more directly, uh, and I'm more enjoying that feeling of shared love and whatever communication is, it's landing deeper than my mind. So I haven't tried that for probably a couple of years now.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Awesome. And Marina also would like to know, did you feel a strong sense of the very moment that Kris's spirit left her body?
Um, it it felt like it just shut down, and it's like her spirit wasn't in her body for the hours that I was, you know, lying next to her. It was already this big, radiant thing, and it's like I don't know. Maybe the best way to describe it is it felt like somebody just turned a light switch off or something that was energizing in her body, but she was still there and this huge big being. So in the sense, I didn't have a sense that all of a sudden a spirit, left the body, so the body was a little lighter, less weighed less heavily. I didn't have that sense. And even for the next couple months, I just felt so much Chris's presence and aliveness, um, that it wasn't a thing like that. Yeah,
Mhm.
okay.
Awesome. Okay, Robert would like to know, in your professional work, have you ever had clients who'd had a shared death experience? And how frequently do you think these shared death experiences are happening to people?
Thank you, Robert. I did not have a client come to me because they had had a shared death experience or report one, while I was working with them. But I did have clients that came to me really grieving with unfinished business, things they wish they had said to the person who had passed away, and things like that. And I used, uh, what I learned from the induced after death communication work of Alan Botkin. I used those techniques and others, and I've had a number of client sessions where clients have had communications and have felt much, much better, like they were able to tell them what they hadn't been able to while the person was in their body. And also hear that, the basic message is always this message of I'm okay, I love you. Uh, so
Mhm. Awesome. There's several comments, people saying how wonderful and your presentation was and how deeply they were moved. We have a comment and a question from Michael, and he says, I found it interesting the motif of seeing, feeling her spirit as an energetic sun. I had a very similar experience with my mom's passing spirit. As she passed, it was like a fountain of sparkling light that filled the room with such pure energy. Then over the next few weeks, I kept seeing sunlight bright behind me, turning and expecting to see the sun there, and there was no sun there. Wondering if this motif of the sun has been experienced by others as well. Do you know, Brian?
well, it certainly was experienced by Paul, my friend. And I've had other people have said it. A sun, a glowing ball of energy. Um, also, this was triggered by Michael's comment. my experience when I go within and I tune in, especially to that divine love um, that is filling us, um, it makes the senses more, perceive things more vividly. The light is a little more glowing or translucent or vivid. Um, so I do think, and there's this clarity that is one of the main qualities of divine presence. When that presence is flowing through, there's this sense of peace and clarity that's striking. So thank you, Michael.
All right. We have somebody in the middle of asking a question. We'll wait till he finishes writing it. But I have a couple more questions for you, Brian. You had a very powerful experience when you received Shaktipat from Muktananda back in your early 20s, and you went into, I think you call it a partial transcendent awakening or something like that is the words that you use to describe it. So I wanted to ask you, when you compare in your own experience that, I'll call it a mystical experience, that mystical experience you had, um, and this, both the shared death experience and after death communications with Kristi, do they feel the same? Do they feel different? In what ways do they feel the same? In what ways do they feel different?
That's an interesting question. Thanks, Yvonne. I think one of the main differences, so when I had the Muktananda experience, I literally went out of my mind into the transcendent space, whatever you want to call that, where my mind was just a little part of something going through that. I did feel one with everyone and everything, and I felt bliss. Um, I think probably the main difference I can point to now is that part of the Muktananda experience was so strong that, and the meaningfulness of everything transcendent was so overwhelming that the meaningfulness of my personal humanness uh, dwindled into an insignificant little speck. I didn't completely lose touch with my body, but I would say that uh, with Kris and these other experiences, I've been much more grounded and much more aware of both realities sort of simultaneously and not just caught up and taken over by the transcendent aspects of it. So it feels more balanced, more integrated, like I'm more simultaneously here. Whereas with Muktananda, I was still in duality instead of being in the human side of duality. I was in the transcendent side of duality and never awakened enough, or my awareness never opened enough to, have it be simultaneously both. Whereas these experiences, the experience with Kris was so wonderful and amazing and terrible at the same time. And I was with both of those very, very completely. Although the love and the joy and the uplift were so strong that there were times when I was just in that, but somehow it was more balanced.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Thank you, Brian. Oh, we've had a couple more questions pop in. Ping has a question. He wonders what would, he or she, I'm sorry, wonders what would happen if someone is not at peace when they're close to death. Would crossing that threshold somehow heal that soul, in your opinion? Mhm.
Well, this is not something from my direct experience. It's a pain, so I appreciate her question. And I'll just give you my speculation if that's okay. Um, it depends on whether the person is able while they're dying to open and pay attention to the more transcendent aspects of it. If they are, then yes, I think it would bring a great deal of healing to what's going on. But those kinds of thoughts and emotions tend to be so gripping, they grab our full attention, and so we're not open enough to pay attention to the bigger thing. And in that case, I think that the Tibetan Book of the Dead describes the bardo states that people really get caught in. Um, and I've seen that there's something called Spiritism in Brazil that has a view of life in the afterlife. And they talk about people getting stuck in after they've passed, not into a full transcendent place, but into a hell realm.
Mhm, 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 mhm.
Best I can answer.
Thank you, Brian. We have another comment and question from Jeffrey. And he says, from my experience of grief, I have found it easier to feel anger than it is to feel sadness. With this subtle preference, I found that I could stay in anger longer than really necessary. Did you have a similar experience with your grief reaction?
Um, Thank you, Jeffrey. So this is an example of what I'm saying. Other people have different views, and it informs us differently, right? But in my case, I was never consciously angry. Um, I just felt sadness and loss and grief, and um, I've learned subsequently to that from my own childhood trauma growing up, that there was ways in which I kind of withdrew or hid from life. And in some ways, I was really living vicariously through Kris's wonderful energy. And that was part of what I was really missing when she was on the other side. Uh, and basically, it pointed out a deficiency in me that's has since been corrected and healed. Um, and so that was more my experience. It was more just sadness and grief rather than feeling angry.
Mhm, mhm. Okay, I have one more question for you, which is this. Um, Did you find that starting to have these after death communication experiences with Kristi opened you to having after death communication experiences with other people?
um, well, I would the experience of going down to Brazil and being introduced to spiritism, and they have a regular tradition of communicating with people that have passed away, and um, I always felt I was about as psychic as a stone. I really, I wanted to see and hear, and I wasn't. I didn't get that, and so for many years, uh, I had to learn that the way it works for me isn't seeing or hearing. It's these deep felt senses that lead to an inner knowing. And I have learned how to have inner knowings about, say, whether a spirit is earthbound or they've passed into the light. Um, and yeah, I think all of that did develop more after Kris had passed away and after I started trying to communicate with her. So it's hard to tell what's from what I learned in Brazil and what from that. But I would say yes, probably it really has been useful. I don't um, I don't panel in the sense of contacting people who've passed away and being the go between loved ones and the spirit. I don't do that work.
Mhm, mhm. All right. Well, thank you, Brian. I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you for an absolutely incredibly beautiful, heartfelt presentation. And there were many, many comments in the chat. for people that were very, very deeply moved by your presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate everyone being here and participating.
Mhm.